Okay, let's talk about, just for a little bit, the University of Idaho emergency funding that they received. And then later, the gag order and University of Idaho President Scott Green and his book. That'll be the main portion of this. But what got me started on this and looking into it was earlier in the week, I was flipping through different people's lives. And I came across a few lives that were talking about the interview room show on YouTube and the Goncalves parents, Steve and Christy, being interviewed on there last week. And part of the discussion was the $1 million in emergency funds that University of Idaho received. And I happened into London's live feed, London's Notebook, if anyone knows you. There was a huge argument going on in her comment section between several people that were apparently discussing the funding in Scott Green's book. And I was like, why are these people like so heated and going back and forth with each other? So it started getting me really interested. And I noticed one other person made a comment that if they felt the university misappropriated the funds, then that's for the legislature to look at. And London pointed that comment out and said she agreed. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I completely agree. Like, what is all this about the funding, and why are people so like upset by this and acting like it affects the case? So I decided I was going to start looking into this. So I looked into the University of Idaho. Yes, they received $1 million in emergency funding after the murders, while they were still having expenses related to it. And what really rubbed me the wrong way was that Chris from the interview room brought this up to the Goncalveses. Like, let's look at this clip.
What's going on behind the scenes here? And we talked to a legislator just the other day. And Karen, tell everybody that what he said about the book.
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to for that specifically, but here's what he said about this $1 million that the university got after the murders, and how they spent it, and how they're not. We've been frustrated that they hired consultants. They spent like $600,000 on consultants, and yet they won't release the findings. So we can only imagine, Steve, how frustrated you guys would be in hearing that they're just not going to say what they released. And even to get that $1 million, what was interesting is some of your state legislators up in your area, a few of them felt that $1 million that went to the university, supposedly to cover emergency, in air quotes, expenses, should have been given to the victim families, not the for-profit college that got it and is now hiding what their findings are and basically how they spent the money.
Okay, so Karen gets wrong that the university is a for-profit. They are a not-for-profit institution. They are a state land-grant college, so they're not-for-profit. And the other thing is there is an accounting breakdown of where that money went. The only thing that's not there is the names of the consultants. And I agree, in the interest of transparency, the consultants should be listed. But it talks about the room and board for Idaho State Police. They were kept in a dorm right near the band field. It talks about therapy for students. It talks about increased security. Remember, the house was turned over to the university in early 2023, so they had security costs for that. If people think that that is a misuse of their tax dollars, then they should contact their state representatives and senators. And this isn't something the true crime community, in my opinion, should be spending a lot of time on. And in fact, the people that I am seeing spending a lot of time on it are the conspiracy theorists. They're saying follow the money, and saying that University of Idaho is covering up for someone associated with the university who is the real killer. That's absolutely not true. And shame on Chris and Karen for even dragging this up in an interview with the Goncalveses, because it has no bearing on the murder case. And they have enough on their plate to worry about. So it feels like they're just stirring up shit for clicks and views. Now you notice he mentioned the book, and that is Scott Green's book that I mentioned in the first part of this video. And let's play another clip where he mentions the book.
Involved, you know, and then.
Well, that was one of the questions we threw at the legislator, and Karen, I'll refresh the memory here, where we asked him about the book. So are you familiar are you aware that he wrote a book? And
Yeah.
Before the trial,
and he
talked
said,
about the murders.
What did he say, Karen? What did the legislator say? What book?
Exactly.
He goes, what book? So the same people that gave the university money, i.e. the ones, well, he didn't vote for it. One of, I can't remember how many you've spoken to, Karen. Keep me honest here. He goes, what?
Okay, why does it matter if a state legislature doesn't know about Scott Green's book? What does that have to do with anything? Okay? Him co-authoring a book should have nothing to do with whether the university applied for and received emergency funding. And also, Karen says, oh, he wrote a book about the murders. No, it's not about the murders. There's a huge misconception going on by a lot of people, not just Chris, Karen, Shannon Gray, that the book is about the murders. It's not. Like, I delved into it last night. I hadn't really looked at it before. I didn't even give it a second thought until I started seeing all these videos and lives this week. So I delved into it, and that book is about a lot of other things and very little things about the murders in it. But it's concerning because Chris and Shannon seem to think that because Scott Green wrote about the murders in the book, that somehow him and the University of Idaho had inside information. So let's look at one of these clips from the Goncalves family, because Steve also seems to think that as well.
Well, we asked
It didn't happen at the University of
on
Idaho. It was.
why the University of Idaho was involved. We're like, why? Early on, this is like early December, in a meeting, and we said, why is the University of Idaho involved? Why are they at all the press releases and this and that? And we were told very abruptly, very, because they were students. And we're like,
okay.
Yeah, well, I'm a parent and I don't know what the university. Why does the university get to know more about my child than I do?
Okay, so they seem to think that the university was privy to more things than they were. And that is not the case, okay? The university, first of all, needed to be in the loop with law enforcement, just like the families. But that's because the university had like 12,000 students and those students' parents that they were having to answer to. This murder happened feet away from campus. It involved 4 students. They needed to know if they had to beef up security. They needed to know if somebody was still on the loose. So they were involved in briefings with the police. Scott Green, he was involved, the Dean of Students, Blair. I'm going to show you an excerpt from Scott Green's book about those briefings. From the book, it says law enforcement took a few punches as people wanting more information blamed them for not communicating details on the investigation. I'm glad they kept the investigation details to themselves, Blaine stated. That's how you get a conviction. MPD and the U of I held daily briefings with each other, but but Blaine emphasized that the U of I had no insider information about the status of the investigation or leads on who committed the crime. The university provided as much information as they could to the police, working through the general counsel's office to ensure the details shared were done so legally. Okay, that was Dean of Students Blair who was quoted in that. You can see that their daily briefings were only the same things that the public was getting and the family was getting. They were getting no inside information. And the family apparently doesn't seem to understand why the university would be at the briefings and at press conferences. And actually, the families could have been at the press conferences as well. It's not unusual for family members of murder victims to appear at press conferences. But the university had to deal with the safety of 12,000 students at that point. This murder happened feet from campus. It was 4 students. They needed to be apprised of whether a suspect was still on the loose, what they could do to beef up security, etc. There was parents of students also wondering what was going on. So the university was keeping people informed through Moscow PD. And of course, the university doesn't have their own police department. Moscow PD provides that for them. So the university and the police department are intertwined, whether people like that or not. But that did not mean that Scott Green or Dean Blair were getting any information that the families weren't getting. Now, Chris goes on, and Shannon Gray, the attorney, to still misunderstand what was going on with the information the university was receiving and Scott Green's book. They are under the impression that it's somehow violating the gag order, or that university staff should be under the gag order.
But who in the law enforcement arena allowed participants from the university to maybe get inside information on an ongoing, probably the highest profile murder in the country while it was active? Who's participating from the university? Because I'm telling you, if at some point that information is revealed and the defense grabs it, they have opened Pandora's box for exposure, in my opinion. You know, that's homicide 101, that you do not do that. Why is he under a gag order? Your family's under a gag order for the civil or for the criminal stuff. We get that. Not a problem. Okay. If the court and, Shannon can keep me in line here. But at the same time, why does the University of Idaho get a free pass?
But that's just it. That's the irony of the whole situation, is that I was never standing up in front of everyone at a press conference and speaking to people about the things that were going on, about the investigation, about what was going on with the University of Idaho and things like that. But that person is not included in the non-dissemination order, and is able not only to not be included in it, is able to write a book detailing some of those facts early on in the investigation and the activities that the University of Idaho took. It is what it is. The judge has made a decision on that, and I don't know if it was an issue that was brought in front of him one way or the other. I think when the non-dissemination order went into place, we all thought that no one would be talking, right? No one, including representatives of the University of Idaho. But that apparently is not the case.
Okay, so Chris thought the families were under the gag order. They aren't. But Shannon going on about the university staff receiving inside info, they didn't. And when I went and looked at Scott Green's book last night, there is nothing in the book that isn't public information. Anything shared about the murders in that book was everything that we all received from the probable cause affidavit and the public police briefings. So there's no reason for Scott Green to be under the gag order. There's no reason for any university staff to be under the gag order. They have nothing that can jeopardize the case. And in fact, I will show you the length of the book and the segment that's actually about the murders. Okay, this is from the table of contents. There is 44 chapters in this book and 593 pages. One chapter, chapter 43, is on the murders. One chapter out of 44, and it is a total of 14 pages. So 14 pages out of 593 and one chapter. So yeah, again, like everything else, this has turned out to be like a big non-issue. There's nothing controversial about this. Now, I know some people say that, well, maybe the university president should have waited to put this book out. I'm not going to argue whether it was the right time or the wrong time. That's not constructive. But we should at least acknowledge that the university received no inside information. They didn't know anything that the public or the parents didn't know. And there was nothing they knew that could jeopardize the case. And there is definitely nothing in Scott Green's book that could jeopardize the case. Those 14 pages only contain things that were already known to the public. So I don't understand why Chris and Shannon are being so disingenuous and why it's like they're trying to just feed the Goncalveses more controversy, things that they don't need on their plate. I mean, they're grieving parents. They do not need these people telling them things that aren't true. So I just wish these content creators, and shame on Shannon Gray being a lawyer as well, I wish these people would look up things first before they start talking about it, because it's very clear that neither Chris nor his wife Karen nor Shannon nor the Goncalveses have even looked into this book, or they would have realized that it wasn't all about the murders. It's being presented as the whole book was about the murders, and that it had information that could jeopardize the trial. None of that's true. So I don't know how we can get people to stop sensationalizing things and stop making controversies out of things. Is it boredom because the case is moving so slowly? Is that what's causing this? But I just wanted to bring this to light because I had seen a lot of people over the last 4 days arguing over this $1 million spending and arguing over the book. And I'm like, what is all this about? So I'm glad I looked into it and was able to see what was actually factual.